Hey guys, and welcome to the first episode of the Package Unpacker, where I take a look at a bunch of the different Unity packages and make an in-depth tutorial on how to use them. In today's episode, we are just going to talk about post-processing. Now, you may already know what post-processing does. It makes things look amazing, but you may not know how to use it, and or you don't know what the effects do. And that's what this video is for. If you're looking for something specific, you can look in the description and I will have some timestamps so you can go to the specific part of the video that you want to see. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is import the actual post-processing package. So to do that, we go to Window, Package Manager, wait for this to load, and then we head down to where it says post-processing. We'll click on this, hit install, and it will start installing for us. Alright, so once we have that installed, we can X out of this window. We can go to the main camera, scroll down, add component layer. We want to look for the post-processing layer component. So we'll grab that. And we also want to grab the post-processing volume component. So we want these two components on here. So you might notice that it says layer. If we go up to the post-processing layer, it says layer here. We have no layer has been set. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add a new layer called post-processing. And I'm just going to call this post for now for simplicity. We can go back to the main camera. We can set the layer of the main camera to the post-processing layer and go down to where it says layer and click post. Alright, so once you've done that, I forgot to mention, we're going to need to go down to post-processing volume and click new. This will create a new profile, and this is how we're going to create our effects. And we also want to make sure is global is checked true. So we want is global to be checkmarked. And that is actually how you set it up. We are now done setting up post-processing. And the next part of the video will be adding our effects and explaining what each of them does. Alright guys, time to start with the effects. So to add an effect, oh wait, before we go into effects, there's one thing I forgot. Before you do anything, you're going to have to go to the layer of the main camera and quickly set this to your post-processing, or else the effects will not show up. Anyway, we go add effect, Unity, and we're just going to go down the list. So first we're going to start with Ambient Occlusion. Now, ambient occlusion, in a very simple sense, takes dark spots on an object and makes areas around them darker as well, making it more realistic. So, mode, we'll get to that in a second. First off, intensity. Intensity is pretty self-explanatory. It makes the ambient occlusion less intense or more intense. For testing purposes, we'll keep it around 2. The thickness modifier will increase the thickness of the ambient occlusion in general. Making things more thick will basically increase the amount of darkness, and making it less thick will do the opposite. And actually, you can even change the color. So if you really wanted to, you could make the ambient occlusion red, or purple, or blue, or green if you really wanted to. But we are going to keep it for black now. There's also scalable ambient occlusion, which has the same intensity modifier, but also has radius and quality. Radius, actually I should probably explain how ambient occlusion works before I do radius. Ambient occlusion basically takes dark spots and makes the areas around them darker. Sample points, so it'll take sample points and make points around them darker. So radius increases the amount of points around the sample points that are becoming darker. Basically meaning that more spots are dark. And then quality is another pretty self-explanatory one. Ultra is very performance heavy, while lowest is not very performance heavy. Although medium is, a good medium, so you might want to keep it at the medium level. If you want to experiment with them, I would recommend turning all of them on, and then just experimenting with them one at a time. I think for now we're going to keep this at a 0.6 because I think that looks pretty good. And we'll head on to the next effect. Alright, now that we've done ambient occlusion, we can move on to the next effect, which in this case is auto exposure. Now, as you might have guessed, auto exposure has a lot to do with exposure, the exposure of the lens of the camera. Now if you're going to be using auto exposure, you're mainly going to be using minimum EV and maximum EV, and those are the only two things we're going to be talking about today. And it's fairly simple. Minimum EV, as you might have guessed, is just you're locating the different, moving the minimum EV of the lens. So if you have it at -9, the exposure is very high because you have a very minimum. The minimum is way down. But then you could have no exposure. So if the maximum is only 9, then obviously you can turn it down and have literally all the exposure, so it's super bright. I think we're gonna keep that somewhere in the middle. Maximum of 9, maybe I don't know. I kind of like this bright. Maybe lower the maximum a little bit. We take the maximum to 5 and this one to -5. Actually, yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Alright, so now that we have auto exposure, we're going to move on to the next one, which is bloom. Now, we don't actually have many light parts in the scene at the moment, but bloom basically makes the bright areas of your scene glow. So if we just take the intensity and move it up a bit, as you can see, the background starts to glow a lot until it basically completely engulfs the entire house. So obviously we don't want that. The threshold, if you have the exposure really up, and the threshold basically increases the actual threshold. So you could have it floating in the abyss if you really wanted to, or you could have no threshold, or you could have a really high threshold, my bad, and the bloom is barely even visible at all, and you have to make it really bright for you to actually be able to see it. So we're going to turn that down. Oh, that was the soft knee. That was the soft knee. I was changing the soft knee. My bad. I meant the threshold. If you have it really high, like that, then it will take a lot for it to come in. In fact, now you can barely even see it at all. So we're going to turn the threshold down back to 0, and we're going to put the we're actually going to move that back to 1 for the time being, and we're going to put the intensity to about. We don't want to have it too much, maybe a 1. Just very simple, like that. Clamp, it's a little confusing. We're not going to talk about that right now. Diffusion, obviously pretty self-explanatory, just the diffusion of light. If you have it really high, it diffuses a lot of light. If you have it really low, it barely diffuses light at all. We're going to keep that somewhere in the middle, around 8. And color is another self-explanatory one. You can physically change the color of the bloom if you really wanted to. So you could have like a light blue bloom. You could have a warm kind of bloom if you really want to. In fact, I think I'm going to go with a warm bloom because I think that makes the scene look much better. And you can also add a texture. You can add a dirtiness texture if you would want to, and then turn on fast mode if you also want to. We're going to leave it as is. Alright, so the next effect that we want to work on is Chromatic Aberration. Now, I personally use Chromatic Aberration a lot with 1-bit 2D games. I make a lot of 1-bit 2D games, and I think this actually adds a lot to those, but it doesn't add a lot to 3D games. Now, you can add a texture to this, but the default is just separates the things, just separates the color spectrum of the object. So as you can see along the edges here, you have the blue, green, and you have all the colors coming out, and you can also change it into fast mode, which makes it, instead of all blurring together, as you can see here, turn on fast mode, it's all separate like that. But at the moment, it's not very useful for 3D environments, so I'm actually just going to remove that chromatic aberration from the scene. The next one we want to focus on is color grading. Now, color grading is very useful for making nice environments and atmospheres. Color grading is probably one of my favorite. We're not going to go over everything, but it's one of my favorite of the effects because it can really set the mood of something. So we want to make this a warm kind of thing. We could take the tack bells, but we could make it, really bright. We could also turn it down a lot, so it's like a spooky. I think we can turn it down a little bit just to make it a little like that. And we can also change the gamma up if we really wanted to. We might turn the gamma up a little bit, and the gain as well. So we can also mess around with the gain until we have a kind of perfect kind of thing there. And then we can also make the tones. So we can add a lot of thing here. So if we want to put a lot of green in the scene, or take out a lot of green, or take in a lot of green, we can do that. And then same with blue. I think I'm going to set these back to 0 the way I had it before, and it seems like it was already 100. And then obviously we can do the hue shift if we really wanted to. It doesn't really do much for us at the moment. We can also turn up saturation so that everything's really saturated, or desaturated to have it as a kind of grayscale. I think I'm going to change the saturation to 10. I think that adds a lot, and then the contrast as well. So maybe if you're going for a certain style, you might want to put the contrast really up high, so you can really see the contrast in the different colors. But if you don't want to have that, you can always turn the contrast down really low, and now it's literally nothing. But you can turn the contrast down really low, so all the colors look about the same. I think we're going to leave that maybe like 5. Yeah, I think 5 is good for now. And there's a lot more stuff you can do with color grading, such as grading curves, if we really wanted to. But I might make a separate kind of thing. In fact, I might make a separate video all in post the different effects, because some of these I could go into way more detail. Oh, and we can also increase the temperature if we wanted to as well, making it a little more warm. So we could do like 5, and we turn it down, and it'll make it more blue. So it's like the temperature of the scene, and then the tint can also be shifted as well. I think we're going to keep that around 0 for this scene. And as you can see, the house is already looking much better than it was before. In fact, I'm going to really quickly close off all of those things, so we can already see what we have in the scene at the moment. So the next thing is depth of field. Depth of field is basically what you would expect. It makes things farther in the scene less focused, and the things closer in the scene more focused. So if we do this, we can do focus distance. We can do it really high so that it can focus for a while, or we can make it really low. So if we wanted to do something like this, we could make the focus distance really, really low so that you kind of have focus distance like that, or we can make it like 4. I think 4 is a good thing for that. But as you can see, it's basically just a depth of field. You can also change the focal length and the aperture if we really wanted to. I can show you what those look like. So let's make this like 3 for now. So we can change the aperture, as you can see. So this makes it really contrast and then really stick out. And then this is a kind of more blurry thing, but I think we're going to keep it back to where it was before with the 0. Or, my bad, was it not at 0? It might not have been at 0. I don't remember where it was before I did this, so I'm going to have to use my old friend Control-Z to bring it back. That seems about good. 5.6. Was it always at 5.6? I might be wrong there. Yeah, it was always at 5.6. Okay, my bad. We'll put that back at 4. And then if we really want to, we could also change the focal length. Roughly the same with that as well. And then now we're done with depth of field, we can go on to the next one, which is grain. Now grain is very useful for making, as another useful one, for making a interesting atmosphere, making the atmosphere that you want to have. But it's fairly self-explanatory. We can make it very intense and add a lot of grain to the scene, or make it very light. So if you make it intense, the grain is very visible. If you make it not as so intense, the grain is not so visible. And I do think we want to add a little bit of grain. And actually, if you make it more intense so you can see it more, you can also decrease and increase the size of the grain. So you can make the grain really big, so that it has a lot of power, I guess, a lot of presence. And if you want to make it not so big, you can always just do something like this, and then it makes the grain. I think we're going to do that, and then make the intensity maybe a 1. Maybe at a 1, just to give it, okay, maybe not, okay, not 1, I meant like 0.1, there we go. Just so it's like, you're just barely there. And then add effect, the next one is lens distortion. Now I don't know if we'll be using much of lens distortion right now. But this is another self-explanatory one. It says right in the title, it distorts the lens. So we can do intensity to 100 or negative 100 to mess around with that. So we can like blow up. We could blow up the house if we wanted to, or make it shrink in the middle. We can also change the X multiplier, which will either put it back to normal. So at 0, it is at normal, and at 1, it's at fully not normal, I guess. And then you can do the same for the Y. So this is the normal Y. So if we did 0, 0, it's back to where it was. But then if we do 1, 1, it's where it directly correlates to this. And then finally center just changes where the actual center of the image is. So we had a 0, 0, it's literally at 0, 0. And then finally scale, we can change the scale of the image if we really wanted to. But for now we're going to keep it at 1. You can do some crazy stuff with this, but I think for now we're going to keep it at maybe 20. Just to give it a little bit of a pop out to get it sort of like that. And yeah, I can't speak. Anyway, motion blur, that is for motion. So we can't really do anything with this at the moment, but I can go over to this. This just adds a blur effect whenever you're moving, so it can make things more realistic while something is moving. So the shutter angle and sample count, so you can mess around with these guys, although this isn't very useful to us at the moment because this is just a static house scene. And finally, we can add the last effect, which I'm pretty sure, no, we got 2 more, my bad. Screen space reflections is a good one because it adds reflections to the scene if you really wanted to. So we do on, we can do preset and then distance fade vignette. So we can increase the vignette if we actually get a little closer here to see there won't be many reflections because there's not much stuff to reflect at the moment, but we can always change the vignette. Do stuff with that. And then we can change the distance fade. Again, not much to reflect. No, there's nothing else in the scene, so there's not much to reflect at the moment. So this is another not very useful one at the very moment. So you can't really see how it reacts with the environment. But screen space reflections, while you have multiple things, you can make things more reflective or less reflective, and that increases. So it can basically make something look reflective, like I was just saying. And finally, vignette. It adds a vignette to your scene. Also, a lot of these are very self-explanatory. You can change the vignette color, classic or mask. I think first we got to increase the intensity of it, so we might too. And vignettes focus your eyes on something. So if we wanted to do like 0.2. just to give it a little bit of that, and then you can make it really smooth or really not smooth. So if we put it in here, that's a not smooth vignette. That is a very smooth vignette. We're going to make it pretty smooth, and we're going to move it out a little bit to 0.2, just like that. And then we can also make it less round or more round. So if we actually make the intensity bigger, less round, more round. So we can increase the roundness of the vignette in the first place. I think we're going to make it like a 0.8, so it's kind of just in the middle, and then take the intensity out back to 0.2 where it was. In fact, we might make it 0.3, and then you can also change the color. So if we're going for something more warm, you might want to do like a dark orange, like a brownish color for the vignette, maybe something like that. We're going for a warm kind of thing, and yeah, so that is basically the entirety of, those are all the effects with the post-processing package. Those are all the effects that you can use. Now, as soon as the game loads up, we can actually see the finished product, although we can kind of already see it. And yes, this is the finished product. This is what our hard work got us into. I think this looks way better than it did before. In fact, if we can actually take off volume to show you what it looked like before. So we can show you. So this is what it looks like now. In fact, we can put the game view back into here. That's not what I meant to do. Put the game view back in there, so we can see this, and it's looking very nice. But then if we if we remove this, it looks much more flat, and it looks very dead, not much atmosphere. But as soon as you put on those post-processings, I think that it adds a lot to the scene, and I think this looks way better than it does. Like literally, look at the difference. If we take off volume, it's very flat, dark, dull. As soon as we put on post-processing, it gets very lively, very warm. And you can always change it if you really want to. You could make it winter, you could give it a dark atmosphere, you can give it a scary atmosphere. I think one of the best uses for post-processing is not only making scenes look good, but also for making an incredible atmosphere for your game. If you'd like to see more on post-processing, I can always make more videos about going maybe 2D post-processing. It's pretty much the same, just with 2D kind of paint over it. But I can always make more videos on post-processing. Anyway, guys, that is it for the first episode of the Package Unpacker. Thank you for watching. If you have any Unity packages that you would like me to discuss next, please put them in the comments, and I will do my best to do those. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you all next time.